Thank you. Thank you, brother. I wanted to start off by saying that this panel was inspired by a panel we had at the last Masonic Con that I had the pleasure of serving in. It was the Fight Club and Freemasonry panel, which inspired this discussion of not just the parallels that the film makes with Freemasonry, but the idea of masculinity, the idea of manhood and role models, and the importance that those role play in defining masculinity, I guess. But it inspired me to create this lecture from that panel discussion, and I went into two books that helped further expand my knowledge on this whole idea. And one was Understanding Manhood in America, Freemasonry's Enduring Path to the Mature Masculine by Robert Davis. And the other was The Path of the Warrior Mystic, Being a Man in an Age of Chaos by Brother Angel Millar. So this is why I thought it'd be great to have you here to discuss this topic, which I think both of you, one takes a historical and practical approach on masculinity and manhood, and the other one takes this mystic and spiritual approach, but they both kind of come to terms on the importance of understanding it and how rarely it gets discussed or practiced or brought into the fray. What inspired you to write Understanding Manhood, Brother Davis?
Well, first of all, I'm a Lewis. I'm the son of a Mason. And for a baby boomer, that's kind of, an unusual thing, because baby boomers, by and large, did not follow their fathers into the American institutions. But I had the privilege of being the son of a Mason, and my father was a very active Freemason. And we lived on a farm and ranch in northwest Oklahoma. It wasn't the end of the world, but you could see it from where we lived. And his brother, my uncle, had adjoining farms, and he lived about 1.5 miles down the road from us. And so as long as I can remember, my father would come in from his work, he would take a bath, he'd put on his Sunday suit, he'd slap on Old Spice deodorant, and his brother would do the same thing. He'd come by and pick him up, and they would go to lodge. And they did that every Wednesday night for 50 years. And so I cannot remember a time when I was not going to be a Freemason. But also, being in kind of an isolated rural area, you belong to the organizations that were available to you in those little small towns. And the Oddfellows were also a fraternal society in that little town. And so my father was also an Oddfellow. And so in a sense, I was sort of raised in fraternal halls because both groups were good at having potluck dinners and things like that. And so a lot of our social conversations happened there. And so I don't remember a time when I wasn't going to be a Freemason. But to add to that story, during my youth, I also got acquainted with the most respected men in that little community. All of our social conversations were outside the home, were held in that little community. And over my boyhood, those men paid attention to me, and they defined what integrity looked like for me. And I wanted to grow up to be like them. And so I had the perfect kind of boyhood to think about what the role of manhood should look like. But again, that was a very traditional thing. And so when I became an adult and started this quest, that we all go on to discover the mysteries of our own life, I wanted to read what people said about manhood, what had been written about masculinity. I couldn't find any books on that topic. And, I could find ancient literature on that topic, obviously, but nothing contemporary. And as I told some of the fellows yesterday, that when you go into a bookstore, you could find all kinds of books on women's issues, and you could find all kinds of books on sexuality issues concerned with manhood, but you just couldn't find any books that dealt with the ideals of masculinity. So that's what motivated me to just write a book about that, so we could start looking at more of a traditional understanding of manhood.
Brother Millar, what motivated you to write The Path of the Warrior Mystic?
Yeah, sure. So it was a couple of different things. And probably the first thing was it was kind of a natural extension of my previous book, the 3 stages of initiatic spirituality, craftsman, warrior, magician, where I was looking at those 3 archetypes or archetypal vocations. And I wanted to go a little bit more into the actual path from, let's say in Masonic terms, the rough ashlar to something approximating the perfect ashlar, the path of self-development and self-discovery, and looking at the problems that we face in our world today. And in regard to those problems, I've spoken around the US. I grew up in England, of course. And I would say overwhelmingly, the men I've spoken to over the last few decades have had really no guidance or very little guidance into manhood, no sort of initiation into manhood. And in most cases, we're really just surrounded. If there were any men in their lives growing up, we're surrounded by bad examples, alcoholism, womanizing, a workaholic, all kinds of issues, or an estranged father, prison, or whatever it may be. And then, of course, when you become a teenager or a little bit more than that, your male friends are in the same situation, often acting in a way that's dishonorable, no sort of loyalty. And so I started thinking more about this question of manhood, reflecting on my own life. Certainly when I was growing up, I wouldn't say that I had any kind of initiation or guidance into manhood. And, something I don't really talk about in the book, but reflecting on my own life, really it was my first 2 long-term girlfriends that gave me any kind of guidance at all. But certainly they could not do everything for sure, or could not really lead me into manhood, but could just help me improve myself a little bit. So I really wanted to just look at many of the problems that we're facing today. And, it was bad enough 30, 40 years ago, but today, of course, it seems to me that there's a little more than attacks on manhood and men and masculinity. And, if you're growing up as a boy turning into a man today, the chances are you won't have a male figure in your family, home life. You probably or may not have any male teachers. The conversations about men from adults would be about how awful they are. And the TV, CNN, whichever, reinforces this views that men are simply oppressive. And, what a terrible situation to grow up in, that your very being is attacked from, all sides, and you're basically regarded as guilty of something. I forget the name of the school, and it's only one incident, of course, but in Australia a few months ago, the boys were told to stand during their morning school assembly, where they would all gather, and to apologize to a female student next to them for the crimes of men against women. And these are, 12, 13-year-old boys. And sure, it is only one incident, but I think it does go to show just how pervasive in the West the idea that, boys and men are we really have the original sin of whatever politics is in vogue at the moment, that it is inherent to being male. So, yeah, that was it.
Thank you. So let me ask you this. What is your definition of manhood, Brother Davis?
Well, the easy definition is the role, behaviors, and attributes of being a man. I think that's probably the scripted definition of manhood. But the more difficult aspect of defining manhood is it has both a social construct and a personal construct. Whether we like it or not, we're largely defined as the kind of men we are based on what the public perceives us to be. And that was what my talk was all about last night. We have to make our own choice about how we're going to represent ourselves before the public. And so we're either going to represent ourselves as men with social honor, men that are going to be respected by people who know us, or we're going to be defined as men that carry the hook of toxic masculinity and make bad choices in their life and that sort of thing. So we have to be aware that we have a public face as well as an internal face. Internally, the challenge we always have as men is the awful challenge of overcoming ourselves, to dealing with the shadow side of our personalities. And every man has those shadows within himself. And those shadows can be pretty dark when he's not had any good male role models to start out his life with. And so he, in many respects, becomes sort of a self-initiated man with absolutely no definition of what that means. And that leads him down the path of, unfortunately, making a lot of mistakes and errors in his young life, which then he has to overcome because those mistakes and errors are often known by other people. So, he's got to recreate himself. And so that aspect of manhood and masculinity is, I think, where Freemasonry comes in. Freemasonry provides that guided path, which helps us understand that we do have a choice, and the success or failure we're going to have comes down to being our decision. And so we're either going to get on that path where we connect ourselves with our divine masculine soul, or we're going to stay on that path of adolescence. And that's a much more painful path to be on. And of course, another little aspect of that, and I probably shouldn't say this, we have this little problem with the penis, and that little sword, has inflicted much damage to our world. And we have to overcome that little monster as much as we enjoy, being acquainted with it. And so that's an important shadow side of our personality that all men embrace and have to figure out what to do with, in positive ways, healthful ways.
Well, you being a past Grand Master, are lodges equipped to be able to provide that service? Not the penis service, just I'll being able.
Yeah.
Our lodges equipped. Let me rephrase the question because your heads are in the gutter now. Are lodges equipped to be able to rise to that occasion and be able to be role models? And be able to be role models to men coming in the doors, because that's what we've noticed. A lot of young men are coming into our lodges searching for a spiritual connection, searching for role models, and sometimes even asking, "Who am I? Tell me." And our lodge is prepared for that.
Well, the obvious answer is we've had 63 years of steady decline in the fraternity. If we were doing the right thing, and if we were equipped to actually communicate the teachings of Freemasonry to the last 3 generations, that have come into the fraternity, then I don't think we'd be in a state of decline today. So no, we have not equipped ourselves to be in the center of what defines the ideals of masculinity. And yet that has been the purpose of Freemasonry. And another reason I wrote the book, Understanding Manhood, is I was interested in how American males looked at the ideals of masculinity and how those ideals have changed over generations, and when was Freemasonry in the center of defining those ideals, and when did they move away from the center of defining those ideals? And in the process of that research, I discovered that in every generation of men up to the end of World War II, our fraternity adapted itself in order to try to get back into the center of the ideals of masculinity or represent themselves as the center of those ideals. And there was something about the World War II era men, they did not pick up on that aspect of our fraternal history. And so that they saw Freemasonry in a very shallow way. It was a ritualistic organization. It provided nice fellowship. And since they didn't know what to do with that, they decided that we also, should be a charitable organization. So we became an organization that was focused simply on the fellowship of men or being a charitable organization. And, I can tell you, being involved in a number of charitable organizations in my life, we do not do as good a job at that as people that have foundations that are in the business of providing those kinds of services. And so while we have the tools, we have not equipped ourselves to be who it's possible for us to be. And that's why this Masonic Renaissance is so important. Because as I mentioned yesterday, we're either going to make the fundamental changes we have to make to get back on the road that our fraternity designed for us to be on, or we're going to die. It's just that simple. And it's going to happen in the lifetime of the young men that are joining our fraternity today. So that's got to be communicated. And then we've got to raise the awareness that we just must get back to being the Freemasonry of old. That's my take.
What is your definition of manhood, Brother Millar?
Yeah, well, I think one of the reasons why we're suffering some confusion today in regard to that subject is that, it is true that women can be, women can display the qualities that we associate with masculinity, and men can display qualities that we associate with femininity. So there are women bodybuilders and there are men's knitting clubs. So for me, then the question isn't really what's my definition. I'm more interested in how cultures throughout history, how they defined masculinity. Yeah. And I think boiling it down, masculinity is about defining boundaries and protecting boundaries and pushing boundaries. And, so if you think of a tribe out 1,000 years ago, they want to defend their boundary, right? They don't want an invader or wild animals coming into their area and terrorizing people or, killing all the men and taking all the women, right? So it's about protecting boundaries, but also pushing boundaries. So they want to go out into a more fertile area where they can grow better crops or graze cattle, or to get to a more advantageous area protected by natural boundaries such as mountains. And and you think of the father as well. The mother is nurturing and loving and forgiving, but the father sets the boundaries. Okay, this is the limits of what you can do. You can stay out till 9 o'clock. Or when you two boys are play fighting, okay, you can't punch him in the face or you can't kick him in the teeth, but you can wrestle. So it's about setting the boundary, but it's also about pushing the boundary, because what if the boy doesn't want to do something? He's too scared to do something that the father perceives he should be able to do. Let's say he's 15, 16, 17, he can't ask out a girl. So the father was going to push him to ask out that girl, or to be a little bit more daring, right? Or to join the football team or whatever it is. Or maybe even academically to push himself that way. You've got to get some good grades to get a good career. So it's about pushing,
encourage and inspiring them.
encouraging, inspiring, yeah, pushing boundaries, but also defining them as well. And, I mentioned this quite a lot, but if you ever watch documentaries about serial killers, almost invariably there's a moment in the documentary where they interview the mother, and the mother says, he's still my little boy and I still love him. You never find a father who says that on a documentary. If the father's there at all, it's always, okay, son, well, what did you did wrong. You got to own up to this. You got to face this. It's a very different response to the mother, because he's about, okay, you broke the boundaries. Now you've got to suffer the consequences. Even though you're my son, I might love you. It's about the boundaries. In regard to the penis, which has already come up, so it makes it easier for me to bring it up. One of the things that I experienced growing up was I'll just say, I saw a lot of womanizing growing up from a child into early adulthood, not just from friends, but from a family member. And, sometimes even when I've been out with a group of Freemasons, they'll start talking about the waitress or something like that. And, I think what men who do that don't realize is, and I'm not saying this from a feminist perspective, it's not only creepy, it's actually extraordinarily weak. Because, okay, there's an attractive woman. Well, there's an attractive woman on every block, first of all. But you should be able to engage with her as a normal person without being mesmerized by the appearance. And be able to have enough self-control, because that's also the boundary, right?
So not showing off your prowess in a way.
Not just not showing off your prowess, not hitting on every woman you come across, being able to speak to a woman as a person. Even if you're interested in her, you still want to have self-control and not be running around like a little puppy dog, right? It's creepy, actually, and weak.
Well, let me ask you this. Our popular culture focuses on what men are doing wrong with the phrase toxic masculinity, but what are men doing right at this day and age?
Well, okay, not much would be the answer, right?
Really? Nothing?
Yeah. Well, I live
We're not doing anything right.
Oh, no. Well, that's the thing. Men, that's a big category, right? There's a lot of men out there, and some are doing things right, and a lot are doing things wrong. And, when I'm in New York most of the time, and honestly there, I feel like a beast. I mean, when I was growing up, I have a complicated childhood I was around the age of 11, 12, 13, I was very into war. I bought very explicit war magazines, the kind of thing that probably wouldn't get published in America today. It was very violent. But, when I was about 14, 15, 16, I was really into goth. And really, you could say, was really going down a very feminine path, looking very feminine in many respects. And became very artistic, obviously. I went and studied fashion later on. And, and I felt like I was one of the more feminine guys in a certain respect. But now I feel like I'm a beast when I walk down the street. The guys look so effeminate, and they're not even trying. But yeah, so... I don't think you can blame an 18-year-old boy or guy who looks like a girl, because as I say, when I was growing up, it was really my first two girlfriends who shaped me up in any way whatsoever. I didn't have any positive male influence at all. But in terms of men that are doing things right, we have the Masonic muscle right here. So, self-control, working the body out, getting stronger. I think those are good things. Reading, and you really want to. And some men are doing this, obviously, not very many. It would be better if there were more men doing it. But you want to develop your mind, your body, and your spirit. You want to have some kind of meditation or religious practice. You want to be working out your body, learning a martial art, putting yourself in a very uncomfortable situation. And developing your spirit, developing your mind. Read thoughtful books, go to museums, learn about culture. That's what men should do. And then, getting back to the boundaries, protecting the boundary and pushing the boundaries, the more, let's say in a cultural respect, the more you know, the more you can be innovative. So you need a base foundation to work from. And one of the curious things about the West is that we don't really have a foundation to work from anymore. I mean, Freemasons do. Obviously, there are other groups that do. Religious people should do. People who read philosophy, but as a whole, our society doesn't have a foundation. So it drifts from one sort of trend politically to another, and it sort of reverses. We believed this yesterday, not anymore. We're shocked by something else now. And it's what Zygmunt Bauman, the Polish philosopher, described as sort of floating world, essentially. Liquid modernity in which everything is floating and nothing is stable. There's no foundation.
What do you think we're doing right, Brother Bob Davis?
First of all, I believe that men are responsible for this new idea of toxic masculinity. I mean, we created that problem for ourselves, and so now we have to face a culture that in many respects has turned against men just because of our failings of past generations. And we have to deal with media bashing. We have to deal with political correctness. We have to deal with the feminine movement, and we have to deal now with our own crisis where our story is not being told by ourselves. It's being told by what the public perceives we are. And we have to understand that the only way we're going to overcome this is to get in touch with our honorable selves. And understanding that honor is a painful field. Honor is not a field where children play. Children have no honor, and they're not expected to, because their young minds don't have the capacity to understand the concept of honor. But if you're going to be a man, and especially if you're going to be a Freemason, you have to play in the field of honor. It's the only field we have to offer you. And so what that means is that you have to be responsible for your behavior. You have to be responsible for the mistakes you make, and you have to be held accountable for them. There's no excuse mechanism out there. It comes down to us. Now, not every man, has to be in the field of honor. You can choose to, you can choose not to be a player in that. In other words, you can choose to stay in your adolescent mind. But if you want to be a Freemason, you have to take on the field of honor. And so I think it's very, very important. You say, what's good about manhood? What's good about manhood is what's good about the teachings and lessons of Freemasonry and initiatic societies in general. That's what's good about manhood, because it provides a guidepost that young men can use to decide what they're going to do with their life. And it's a life-changing event. It can be a life-changing event for men. And so what's positive about manhood is we know what manhood looks like, because we understand what integrity looks like. And we understand what social honor means. And so it's up to us to become a part of that. And so,
Thank you.
yeah.
Why don't we open it up for questions? Anybody have any questions? Ron?
think that a big part of that was a lot of those guys came back, first of all, had to squash their manhood down because they had problems from dealing with the war. They used to call it shell shock and PTSD. You know that. They were looking for a brotherhood because their brotherhood were either killed or left behind in the war. We're seeing that same type of thing today. It's going to happen less and less now that we pull troops out, but we've had troops overseas for a very long time. We have a lot of those guys that are coming back looking for brotherhood as well and dealing with the same types of issues. So stepping back to innovation in Freemasonry, what do you see that we could be doing at this point to be there for those types of brothers to offer a course for the
So what do you see
that we could be
What-
doing innovatively?
that we could be doing innovatively in Freemasonry for brothers that are coming from the service, you would say? Okay.
Provide
To provide this idea of manhood.
Well, again, our rituals instruct us in this area. The first thing that we learn about Freemasonry is how to keep secrets. You know, what not sharing confidences means. And so the one thing that we can do for men that have come out of these horrible situations that has damaged them is we need to be able to provide a safe environment where those men can have intimate conversations with us. You know, if there was a failing, I think, in the World War II era men, they kept all of that trauma within themselves for almost their entire life. And I've even seen it in Vietnam era men. But I've also had the personal experience of being engaged with men who were in the Vietnam War, and just had issues. But if you create the assurance among your brothers that you can be trusted, you can be a confidant for them, then what happens is they start to open up. And as they open up, you see the higher aspect of their nature. And you see that, you know, there's a wonderful man under this facade that he built, this brick wall that he built around him to protect himself. And so we just must be able to have these intimate conversations with men. And we are the organization that can do that because we're taking obligations, you know, that assures people that we will keep those confidences. That's why secrecy is so important to manhood. And we've got to be able to share. We've got to be able to share our innermost selves and our innermost challenges and problems. And we've got to be able to connect with men whom we think can help us in overcoming those things. And that's a part of the solution.
Any other question?
So one of our prospective brothers was here. He had to run off and run some errands. So he gave me a couple of questions for you guys that he was curious about. One was, where does vulnerability play in a man's life, given the popular idea that men who show vulnerability are often perceived as weak? And then his second follow-up question to that would be, how do you differentiate between being a, quote, nice guy and being a good man? And what really differentiates between the two?
What Angel? Yeah, well, when I was young, I was definitely a very nice guy. When I was late teens, I was harmless. I was a very sweet guy. And, you know, honestly, I probably like that person. But, you know, the thing about nice guys, they have to be nice because they're also weak, right? And the difference between a nice guy or a nice man and a good man, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of differences, but, you know, to be a good man, you have to be strong in yourself. And I think you have to be capable. And, you know, on some level, I think you have to be you have to have this may sound really bad, but you have to have a relationship with violence in some respects. And, that doesn't mean that you're a violent person or that you enjoy violence, but it means you have some understanding of it and what it does and what it can do and what you can do. And, I study and I've practiced martial arts for a long time. And part of it is learning how to inflict violence on someone, right? That's literally what it is. But the other part of it is also learning self-restraint. You can't hospitalize your sparring partner every week, right? Or ever, really. So you learn restraint as well, and you learn to respect violence. And violence is a real thing. It happens. So I think really to be a good man, you have to have strength. You have to be capable of defending yourself and other people, and have the self-control not to use it unless it's absolutely necessary. You mentioned toxic masculinity, and probably in air quotes earlier on. I just want to give an anecdote and a comment about toxic masculinity. A couple of years ago, I was walking home late at night, and there was a group of young men, probably around 20, on a street corner, and they were screaming at some other guy a block away, screaming and threatening him. And we would call that toxic masculinity today. The problem is there's nothing masculine about that behavior. It's incredibly feminine, actually. If it's anything, it's toxic femininity. These guys have never had a male role model in their life. Their fathers were either absent or gave them nothing about being a man. Being a man is about, well, many things, but one of the main things is self-control, having that own border around your own emotions. If you're drunk with your friends standing on a street corner screaming at some guy from a block away, that is not masculine behavior. That is absolutely feminine. And they would probably think that they're being manly. They're not good men. They're weak men. They're pathetic, to be honest with you. And they're not nice either, obviously. But to be, but that weakness, if you're weak, there's one of two options, right? You can either be a nice guy, or you can be one of those guys who gets together with his friends because he's too afraid to tackle someone one-on-one and stands on a street corner screaming like a girl or some guy. But, to be a good man or to be a man, I think, like it or not, you need a relationship with violence. You need to understand what it is, what you're capable of doing. And you need the self-control not to use it unless absolutely necessary. And the moral compass to use it for the right reasons if it comes up.
I happen to agree with Angel that when you see men yelling at other men or other people, that is not a masculine characteristic. And how do I know that? I test that by observation. One of the fundamental differences between men and women, and just start paying attention to this because it always verifies itself. When women talk to each other, women always talk face to face. Because when they're communicating with each other, and they do it even with men, when they're communicating, they want to look you in the eye. They want to see how your body reacts to what they're saying. So, they're totally engaged and involved with that communication. How do men communicate? Men communicate side by side. We don't stand there, look at each other in the eye and have conversations. We just sit side by side and talk to each other. So you see, I think the individual that Angel's talking about, where he's out there screaming to everybody, he's not representing toxic masculinity. He's representing the animal side of his behavior. I don't know if I could call it feminine, but I know it's not masculine. And vulnerability, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know, but I know that I have felt vulnerable many times in my life. But I also know that part of that has to do with my age. When I was a boy, the role models were well defined. the males, the males in my culture, they were the working men, they were the guys that were taking care of all the problems of the world. My mother, she never worked outside the home a day in her life. She was a housewife. She was a mother. She played that role of her time. And so my vulnerability as a boy had to do with when I did something that my father, did not think was appropriate. And he would scold me right sharply, depending on the situation. And, or I would do something that my mother thought was inappropriate. She would let me know. So when you're a boy in that kind of a culture, you experience all these vulnerabilities. And, but yet at the same time, you understand that I can't just be vulnerable like this and reacting to how everybody else thinks about me. I've got to do something proactive about that. I've got to somehow become comfortable in my own skin. And I've got to overcome my own vulnerability. And I can't do that if I cannot affirm myself in my own skin. And that gets down again to understanding what kind of person I'm going to be and how I'm going to represent myself. And I discovered that as long as I represented myself as a man of integrity, as long as I had the kinds of behaviors that society sees as appropriate for men, then I didn't have anything to be vulnerable about. So that vulnerability thing just kind of, went by the wayside. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you. This is more of a comment than a question, but I very much welcome your response to it. I'm so grateful to you all, first of all, for doing this panel. I've been looking forward to it all weekend, and I'm very grateful to hear words used like honor and loyalty and weakness and strength and truth telling and honoring people's privacy and things of this nature. I had the privilege to endorse Angel's latest book, and I said, cynics will never forgive him. And I hope you're offending cynics everywhere. And I find that in our culture today, it's so suffused with cynicism. And the moment you begin to use these terms that you've been using, to speak of loyalty, for example, to speak of solidarity, to speak of honor, of strength, of abstaining from gossip or running down people's reputations, on social media and elsewhere, people roll their eyes. They literally just laugh at these things. And I find that the dominant language on social media is sarcasm, and sarcasm has its place as humor, but it was never intended to be the normal vocabulary that we constantly engage in. And also rhetorical questions, which I absolutely find the height of cowardice, or the depth of cowardice, I should say. A question is such an honorable thing. When you're really asking somebody a question, you're entering into an exchange with that person. But we all know what a rhetorical question sounds like, and it just does brutality to a question. So I guess I really just want to say that I really believe you are providing part of the solution. Freemasonry is providing part of the solution. This weekend has been suffused with discussions like this one. And I just think it is so critically important that we not engage in cynicism, not engage in this kind of sarcasm, rhetorical questioning, and so forth, and continue to use this language, cynics be damned. So I really appreciate you doing this.
One more.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much for the panel. As a woman, I really enjoyed your perspective. And I just wanted to share a little bit of the female perspective on masculinity. And as a woman, I welcome it. I just wanted to say, I don't agree with the phrase toxic masculinity, me being a single mother of two boys, one 21, one 16. I have to build that masculinity in myself to be that role model for my sons. And I do understand the importance of having that in a boy's life. And I just want to say that the phrase toxic masculinity has to be changed to toxic behavior, because I am a dean of students at a middle school, and I deal with students who are in trouble. And oftentimes these students are girls who get in trouble and exhibit that, that toxic behavior. And our young men do need great role models, and Freemasonry provides that for men who are 18, sometimes 21, depending on the jurisdiction. But I believe that that concept has to be brought down to the level of middle school, because this is where our young men are shaped to be the men that we are looking for, that masculine man who has the boundaries, not only the boundaries, but also has the capability of reflecting and perhaps changing those boundaries, because there might not be the correct ones at the time. And a man who will be there to protect their woman. Speaking as a woman, this is how I feel like a woman. I bring my feminine side with a man who exhibits that kind of characteristics that I can feel safe with. I can drop all my guards, all my walls, and I can feel vulnerable. And we talked about vulnerability as well. And I just want to wrap this up with saying that we all have that masculinity and femininity, not just in our biological bodies through our hormones, etc., but also spiritually. We all have the divine masculine and feminine, and I think that we need to embrace that, and we need to be in touch with that. And there's nothing wrong with being a man who has emotions and is caring and compassionate. Actually, that is a part of being a positive masculine figure. And we do have a problem. I think collectively we need to come together and find solutions, because if we don't, our humanity is going to face a bigger problem. Thank you so much. And please feel free to respond. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I want to, I feel like I have to make one more comment here on a subject that I certainly started. And by counseling the young men in this audience to stay centered on the head that is above your waist.
Way to end it. Anything else you want to say? Anything else you want to say before we end this? Okay, I think we're good.
Yeah, I just had one comment that I already shared with Angel. I haven't had the privilege of reading Brother Bob's book, but in reading Angel's book, The Path of the Warrior Mystic, I personally, having a 16-year-old son, it's a book that I've already shared with him, that I've told him, I'm going to need you to read this book. And I think that his book is a great kind of blueprint for our young men, especially like in the high school age, to actually read, man. And like, if I had a way, I would find a way to put that book in the high schools in LA, man, because it really is great. And thank you for putting that in print for us.
And you could get them on Amazon, both of them. And I believe this one, there's an Audible version as well that I've
Yeah,
heard.
there's Audible and Barnes and Noble and all kinds of
So
ways.
they're both
Yeah.
available. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody.